defilements are not always in our accordance. Welcome back to the 13th online episode of Peacetime, hosted on alternating Sunday mornings by PeacePoint and on alternating Thursday evenings by DIMC Information with myself, Prime Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from Dhammakaya International Meditation Center in Azusa, California. Today's session will be about an hour and a quarter long and will consist of a 25-minute talk and 20 minutes of meditation, finishing up with 20 minutes of conclusion. Welcome back to the 13th online episode of Peacetime, hosted on alternating Sunday mornings by PeacePoint and on alternating Thursday evenings by DIMC Information with myself, Prime Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from Dhammakaya International Meditation Center in Azusa, California. Today's session will be about an hour and a quarter long and will consist of a 25-minute talk and 20 minutes of meditation, finishing up with 20 minutes of conclusion, answers to viewer questions submitted in advance, and news updates. Last time you saw me, we looked at mindfulness and the functioning of the meditational mind. The topic Welcome back to the 13th online episode of Peacetime, hosted on alternating Sunday mornings by PeacePoint and on alternating Thursday evenings by DIMC Information with myself, Prime Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from Dhammakaya International Meditation Center in Azusa, California. Today's session will be about an hour and a quarter long and will consist of a 25-minute talk and 20 minutes of meditation, finishing up with 20 minutes of conclusion, answers to viewer questions submitted in advance, and news updates. Last time you saw me, we looked at mindfulness and the functioning of the meditational mind. The topic for the Dhamma talk today will be rust in the mind, and again, this session I would like to encourage you to send in any questions you have by emailing me at peacepoint.questions@gmail.com so that I can have a shot at answering them next time round. Last session we talked about the building blocks of our human mind, those 5 things that we have called our psychophysical constituents or aggregates. This session we will be extending our examination of the software of the mind to the faults that reside therein, which we give the technical term defilements, referring to their tendency to dirty our mind, or taints, referring to their ability to color the mind, or afflictions, referring to the fact that we do not welcome them, or poisons because they destroy the health of the mind. Defilements in the mind are like ingrained bad habits. They are the things which cause us to act out negative emotions rather than use our common sense. They're the sort of thing that can cause a person to snap, with tragic consequences like the dramatic example of school shootings in the US, perpetrated by kids themselves. Although defilements are not always this destructive, the example helps you not to underestimate their power or overlook the possible harm of defilements left latent in the mind. The behavior of people under the influence of defilements is as if they are not in control of their actions. Usually, defilements lie latent in the mind, but if they are triggered by having your buttons pushed or even by hot weather, they will morph themselves into all sorts of unwelcome behavior. Although as meditators we extend a feeling of friendship to everybody in the world, because we believe that everyone is good underneath, we cannot trust the defilements which exist in the human mind and must take every possible effort to rid ourselves of them. Defilements in the mind develop in rather the same way that pure iron or steel can develop rust on it. It is not really the steel itself that has the problem, but the problem comes from an impurity which contaminates the pure substance, and by the way it reduces the value or potential usefulness of its substrate material. So, if you have a lump of pure steel with no rust on it, you can use it for many useful tasks. You can manufacture things, or you can mold it into different products. However, once it goes rusty, the steel becomes almost worthless until you can remove the rust. With the mind, we tend to talk about the way defilements affect the mind in much the same way. Meditators understand that the mind, in its undefiled form, is very efficient. It is able to process a lot of information quickly. It is able to have a good sense of awareness, and it's able to withstand a lot of pressure. But if there are defilements or rust that manage to attach themselves to the mind, then instead of being able to work to its full potential, the mind is compromised and tends to work at only 2 or 3% capacity. So how can we recognize these defilements in ourselves? Is it possible at least to put a name to them? The diseases of the body are categorized by medical professionals into groups such as respiratory, cardiac, infectious, tropical, and so forth. The defilements in the mind, and I'm not talking about psychosis or brain damage here, can be divided into 3 main groups: those of greed, wanting to get things by dishonest means; hatred, wanting to harm oneself or others or their property; and delusion, inability to understand things as they really are, such as the deluded idea that you're superior or even inferior to everyone else. The defilement which we suffer from most often is greed. All 3 defilements, whether they are greed, hatred, or delusion, are similar in that they cause the mind to be darkened or clouded. The minor effects they cause may escalate to cause serious damage. But greed, hatred, and delusion also have distinct characteristics. The first group of defilements responsible for the dulling of the mind is stinginess or greed. Whenever stinginess or greed arises in the person's mind, it will make that person's mind dull. It will constrict the mind through anxiety and fear that that person's wealth will be stolen away. The mind, diffused by so many worries, will have little strength. It is diminished and irritated. Desire and greed are not very damaging, but they take a long time to recover from. Once we have been thrown off balance by desire, it will be a long time before we can regain our equilibrium. The effect of desire is not very damaging either in spiritual or worldly ways. Even in its extreme form, you would not be put behind bars except for theft or sexual assault. However, The effects may be long-lasting because they haunt us long after the event. For example, heartache is so deep-rooted that it may stay with you for the rest of your life. Materialism tends to feed off this sort of defilement. A second sort of defilement is those involving taking advantage of others out of hatred or anger. Unlike the defilements of greed, hatred is very damaging, but it doesn't take long to recover from. Under the sway of hatred, there's no end to the violence and cruelty one can do. One can even go as far as to kill one's own teachers or parents. The worldly punishment for violence is severe. You can be thrown in jail or even end up on death row. From the point of view of spiritual retribution, just one temper tantrum can do a lot of damage to your spiritual progress and even to your credibility. If you look at all the wars in the world, you can see the damage that hatred can do to lives. The upside of anger is that it is usually short-lived. It's not like the defilement of desire, where things like heartbreak can go on for years at a time. By contrast, if there's a situation of anger, often all that's needed is for someone to say sorry, and the tension is gone. Therefore, if you have collected up vengeful situations in your past, be quick to go and settle the disputes by forgiveness, even if the disputes are with those who are your juniors. The third category of defilements is ignorance or delusion. Some people mistakenly think what you don't know can't harm you. Ignorance usually imprisons the mind in darkness and obscures its true potential. But if ignorance is banished from the mind, wisdom will arise in the mind as a brightness to dispel that darkness. Ignorance has the character of being very damaging, and it also takes a long time to recover from. This is the most frightening thing about ignorance. The worldly and spiritual retributions are both serious. If one does something without understanding, one will keep on making the same mistakes again and again. We don't know that we don't know. By way of illustration, there is the story of a blind man who had to find his way home down a mountain track in the dark. A friend felt sorry for him, so gave him a candle lantern to light his way. "What use will a lamp be to me?" asked the blind man, "because I cannot see the light." "Take the lantern," said the friend. "It will protect you from others who might bump into you by mistake." The blind man walked a little way down the mountain path with the lantern. At first all went well, but then, before long, he found that more and more people were bumping into him. "Can't you see my lantern?" demanded the man. "Why are you bumping into me like that?" Eventually, a compassionate man came close to him and explained, "Friend, don't protest like that. Didn't you know that your lantern is blown out?" Ignorance is the same as blindness to the light of the lantern. We don't know what we don't know, and often we can't see the value of the efforts of others to help us either. The real tragedy of ignorance is the way it leaves important questions about the life and the universe unanswered. We have no idea where we have come from, when we will die, if we have somewhere to go after we die, or what the purpose of our life is. When we have no certainty about such questions, we live our life by guesswork. The guesswork leads inevitably to decision-making under the influence of the defilements in our mind. Worse than this, these three groups, greed, hatred, and delusion, can be elaborated by being mixed and combined like three primary colors to obtain the entire spectrum of defilements in between. Ignorance is said to be at the root of the defilements of greed and hatred too, because once we don't know when we will die or when our wealth will disappear, ignorance teaches us to hang on to our possessions and accumulate more and more. It will also influence you never to give anything away to anyone else, even when you have more than you can use. Let's say you are obsessed with getting an expensive car. The underlying reason you want the car is that you are deluded into thinking that owning a new car will bring you lasting happiness. Really, for most people who buy something that they've been dreaming about for years, they will find out that after a day or two, the novelty wears off, and it's just like everything else they own, especially if the car happens to break down or get scratched, then your little bubble of pride will be well and truly burst. There are defilements in the category of greed, all the way from trivial to the serious. There's an escalation in severity on the spectrum of greed, from deviousness to attraction, from attraction to wanting in excess of your fair share, from wanting in excess of your fair share to wanting to obtain things by dishonest earnings, from wanting to obtain things by dishonest earnings to desiring things in a dishonest way, from desiring things in a dishonest way to open covetousness, and from open covetousness to infatuation. Under the influence of ignorance, if someone takes away something we love, we harbor anger or hatred from them because we blame them for stealing our happiness. We even hate people for having something we don't have but want, which is how jealousy relates to hatred. Whenever we don't get as much as we want, however, the dismay niggles the mind. Not yet anger, but a precursor. From dislike, it turns to irritability. From irritability to undirected anger. From undirected anger to directed anger, and eventually from directed anger to vengefulness or spite. Again, coming directly from our ignorance about the nature of reality, there are certain defilements of the mind which will hijack the little common sense we had, leading from ignorance to absent-mindedness, from absent-mindedness to conceit, from conceit to adherence to superstitions, from adherence to superstitions to doubt, from doubt to false view of individuality, from false view of individuality to delusion, and from delusion to wrong view. Because ignorance contributes to greed, hatred, and delusion, it's considered to be the taproot for all the three categories of defilements. It's said that a healthy person may go through life without ever seeing the inside of a hospital, but there is no person who has never suffered from some defilements in the mind. Does that sound scary? All of you are seriously sick, I'm afraid, and it's probably why you're listening to this live stream and thinking that meditation can do you some good. These defilements come in many shapes, sizes, and forms. Let's compare the potency of serious, medium, and subtle forms of defilements. A serious case of defilements means that something snaps and you go on the rampage with a shotgun whenever the weather gets hot. But when the weather is normal, you might lead a normal, harmonious family life. This would not concern the functioning of the brain, but it is something that is a latent tendency which suddenly pops up when certain circumstances trigger it. This is a serious case, and hopefully no one listening in, especially in the context of a meditation community, will ever have the misfortune of falling prey to defilements of this seriousness. Even if you are not a meditator, defilements of this level of seriousness will still be of concern to you because they can put you on the wrong side of the law. On the medium level, you would come across things that are a little bit more benign, things that might impede your efforts to bring your mind to the center of the body. Such medium-level defilements in the mind hamper our efforts to meditate. In the technical vocabulary of meditation, they are what would be known as hindrances, things such as sense desire, ill will, sleepiness, absent-mindedness, or doubt. These are also defilements of the mind, which mean the mind does not work as well as it should, but they're not as serious as the shotgun example. If you are not a meditator, the chances are you would not care about this level of defilements, but if you do meditate, you need to pay attention to them, because they will hinder progress in your meditation. And then more subtle still are the minor defilements, equivalent to the thin layer of dust that accumulates on your mirror at home, which, if you didn't bother polishing your mirror, you wouldn't even know was there in the first place. The equivalent level of defilement would be little, niggling peccadilloes like minor irritation, discontent, or maybe not understanding yourself to the full. As meditators, we are still concerned with this level of defilements, especially if we're trying to uproot all the imperfections in our personality, and in any case because of the threat that these subtle defilements can proliferate and escalate into larger problems in our lives. So, you cannot afford just to let them be, any more than you would leave an undetonated landmine lying buried. If you understand the potential damage they cause, then you find that you have to at least stop them from getting worse, and if at all possible, to try to overcome them and uproot them. As a meditator, you start to have the possibility not just to look at the symptoms, but actually to look at what causes the defilements in the first place. If you were to talk, let's say, about emotional intelligence, you would just be telling yourself, don't be so angry, and as a result, become more inhibited as a result of that. But if you are a meditator, you have the possibility not only to deal with the symptoms, but to deal with the viruses or bacteria that are the root cause of those habits and emotions. In other words, to nip anger in the bud. If you were to construct a chart of all the possible categories of rust you can have in your mind, then it might look rather like the picture you see in the diagram. What is interesting for us in this picture is that greed, hatred and delusion all originate from ignorance. That all takes place beneath the ground, as it is rooted in our subconscious, the part of ourselves that we can't normally see. But above ground, what we can see are the weeds in our conscious mind, which are the symptoms of what lies deeper in the subconscious. So, for example, when greed overcomes the mind, as you can see in the green, it may manifest in serious defilements, the largest leaves such as being greedy or stingy or openly covetous. The medium-sized leaves are things like being attached to meditation results, wanting to get more than your fair share, being devious or wanting to get things by dishonest means. The small leaves would include deviousness, lust, unscrupulous earnings, or mere attraction. If you're talking about the anger root, which you can see in the red, then hatred and vengeance are the larger leaves. The medium-sized or small leaves might be little niggling things like irritation, spite or envy, for as long as they are not expressed. From the delusion root, which you can see in the purple, you have the large-sized leaves for things like false view, which is basically erroneous worldview, understanding or assumptions about the nature of the world. It is serious because if you misunderstand reality, there are a lot of things you can do which will upset other people. The smaller delusion leaves would include things like being obstinate or doubtful. The details of the leaves and their antidotes will be what we talk about over the course of the next few sessions. So, having looked at the definition, categories and potency of defilements, we now turn to look at stages of mental processing at which the defilements interfere with our mind. Defilements may interfere anywhere in the process, from data monitoring, perception, to filtering, sensory reception, to evaluation or central processing, to cognition and implementation. So let's look at each stage of processing in turn. At the level of sensory reception, our assumptions and prejudices can affect our perception of the situation. We might be trapped in our own point of view and fail to consider how others view the situation, or how the situation as a whole might appear to a casual observer. Often we are biased toward familiar or quantifiable data. The data we base our decisions on may thus be flimsy. Sometimes our assumptions can affect what we see. There's an example of a woman looking for her husband in a crowd where she assumes he's wearing a green coat. She looks really hard for anyone wearing a green coat, but she can't see him anywhere. After some time, she notices her husband is standing right next to her, but wearing a red jacket. This is an example of our senses being limited by our attitude or being trapped by our assumptions. Possible solutions for assumptions that affect our sensory registration are to ask ourselves the questions: what data am I focusing on? What other data would I like? What data am I leaving out? Additionally, We should try to be aware of our prejudices and assumptions and avoid relying on flimsy data or previous knowledge. You also have to learn to base your decisions on reason rather than emotion. At the level of sensory registration, lack of restraint of the senses can dictate what you perceive and what you filter out of your consciousness. If you are unaware, your defilements will take over this job instead of your mindfulness, and the result may be to let damaging sensory information into your mind, further stirring up defilements. Examples of lack of restraint of the senses may be returning to things that trigger grief, that remind you of a recent bereavement, or being unable to look away from the sight of a horrible accident. A similar weakness can lead to temptation for addicts, who just want more and more gratification via their senses. For example, a person who is unable to have fun unless they're drunk will become dependent on liquor, damaging their mind and their worldview. The solution to overcome defilements on the level of sensory registration is to practice restraint of the senses, not becoming attached to things either as a whole or in part. At the level of central processing, faulty discretion is the result of action of defilements at the point where we are considering information. This is the time when we need to have correct models and principles in mind. Lacking these, we may see good as evil or evil as good. For example, turning a blind eye to dangerous behaviors. It will upset the whole calibration of our moral compass. The solution to overcoming defilements at the level of central processing is to associate with wise friends and avoid those who are morally reckless. The good judgment of wise friends will brush off on you. Apart from this, you should try to be a person of principle while gradually calibrating your sense of discretion. At the level of cognition and implementation, there are two important sorts of defilements that can cause interference between the decision and the action: procrastination and recklessness. Some people can lie in bed all day having decided to get up. Sometimes it can come down to not seeing danger in small things. A person can know all the theory about how laziness is bad, but it doesn't help them avoid being a lazy person. The defilements impede putting what they know into practice. The solution is to overcome defilements at the level of cognition, and implementation is to overcome procrastination by being quick to do things that require speed, being meticulous in things that require detail, and avoiding addiction to vices and roads to ruin. Even though many of these mental traits might be considered minor, no more than rust in the mind, we have to try to get rid of them, because otherwise they will be damaging to us in the future. For most people, the mental taints are so subtle that they don't feel that it doesn't matter whether they are there or not. They are like tiny bacteria which can cause much more serious diseases. Often, if we had never tried meditation, it would be difficult to appreciate the dangers of these taints. However, when we dedicate ourselves to mental training, we see that these taints cannot be ignored. We cannot just let them lie because they will proliferate, and to this end we now turn to set aside some time for some meditation, as this is our most powerful antidote against the proliferation of defilements in the mind. So at this time, we settle ourselves for some meditation. And if you would like to find a comfortable position for yourself now, as you sit down to meditate, then try to follow my instructions as we meditate now. So you'd like to start by finding a comfortable position for yourself in meditation. With your right leg on your left leg, your right hand on your left hand, with the index finger of your right hand touching against the thumb of your left hand. With your hands palm upwards on your lap, find a position for yourself by which you feel alert and yet relaxed, not leaning too far forward nor too far back, not leaning to the right nor to the left. Find a position of poise for yourself. Make sure your breathing and your circulation are natural and unimpeded. And adjust the position of your body to minimize any possible aches or pains. Make sure you're sitting comfortably as possible. And relax every muscle of your body. Relax every muscle, starting with the muscles of your forehead, your eyebrows and eyelids, making sure your eyes are only very gently closed. Never squeeze your eyes closed, but close your eyes gently in just the same way you close your eyes to go to sleep. Make sure there's no heaviness on your eyelids. If you notice that your eyes are closed too tightly, or if there's heaviness on your eyelids, you may need to open your eyes and close them again more gently. Close your eyes in just the same way you close them to go to sleep. And relax the muscles of your face. Relax your neck, your shoulders, both arms, down to the tips of your fingers. Relax your chest, trunk and abdomen, both of your legs, down to the tips of your toes. So that all the way from the top of your head to the tips of your toes, there's no remaining part of your body with any stress or tension anymore. If you notice any tension remaining in your body, then do your best to relax it completely. Because if your body is completely relaxed, you have the feeling as if your body seems to melt away into the atmosphere around you. And you have no further worries about your body anymore. Once your body is completely relaxed, you can turn your attention to relaxing the mind. The easiest and most efficient way to relax the mind is to forget temporarily about every worry and concern in your everyday life. No matter whether it be thoughts of work, friends, family, studies, finances, or any other thing. Don't think about your future and don't think about your past. And keep your mind entirely in the present moment, making your mind light, radiant, spacious and refreshed. Light like a feather, radiant like the morning sun, spacious like the ocean, and refreshed like a flower bud in the early morning dew. If you like, you may like to think of all the merits which you have done in your past, whether it be the merits of generous deeds for the benefits of society around you, donations to the temple, offering of robes, keeping the precepts purely, even meditation and chanting in your daily life. If you think about all the merits you have performed, and in the end you have a feeling of joy and happiness in the mind, as if the merit moves you to the extent that you feel refreshed inside. We cherish such a feeling of happiness in our mind for a few moments, as if all the happiness seems to come from the center of our body. And when we feel relaxed, both in body and in mind, very gently, using no effort at all, we allow our attention to settle and to center to a point in the middle of our stomach, as if in the center of our stomach was just an empty space. An empty space without any muscles or tissues, without any organs or bones, just an empty space inside ourselves, like a cavity, a hollow cavity. And now very gently, without any effort at all, we imagine that the bright, shining sun, which we imagined a few moments ago, is shining from the center of our stomach. A sphere of light shining from the inside of our stomach. We imagine the object with a light and gentle attention, as continuously as we can, for as long as we can, without letting the mind wander anywhere else. If the mind wanders to the sounds around us, to the sensations in our body, or to the thoughts in our head, as soon as we realize, we bring our mind back again to the center of our body and continue as before. Our mind may wander 100 times, 1,000 times, but we should pay no attention to the irregularity by which our mind tends to wander. It is our job each time only to bring our mind back again to the center and continue as before. If our bright object disappears, then we can think of a new one. We don't need to worry whether we see the object clearly or not. We just have to accept the object however clearly we can see it. Even if we can see only a part of it, even if we can see only a shadow of it, even if we can only see it not so clearly as with our eyes, we have to accept it as we see it. At the same time, not entertaining any thoughts in our mind. If you find that you have a strain of thoughts coming up in your mind, it may be necessary for you also to use the sound of a mantra. Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, over and over again, as if the sound of the mantra seems to come like a silent music from the center of your body. Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, over and over again. You should check that your attention is only very light at the center. Make sure you don't use too much effort when you are meditating. If you use too much tension when you are meditating, even too much enthusiasm, what you will find is that there is a certain degree of stress on your eyebrows or across your shoulders. If you find that that is true for you, then try to loosen up a little bit more. Try to relax more as you imagine the bright object. However, if you find your mind wandering very easily, or if you feel sleepy in your meditation, then sometimes you need to keep your mind a little bit more firmly at the center of your body. Always keep your mind with a bright object at your center, observing the bright object as continuously as you can, for as long as you can, without letting your mind wander anywhere else. Observe the object without entertaining any thoughts in your mind. Don't feel elated by the pleasing things you see. Don't feel disappointed by the displeasing things that you see. Don't try to resist anything which comes up in the mind. And at the same time, don't have any expectations about what you might see in the future. Simply rest your mind, observing as continuously as you can for as long as you can at the center. Keep your mind always at the center of what you see, the center of the bright sphere of light, or the center of the Buddha image inside yourself, if that's what you prefer. Eventually, as you train the mind, always bringing the mind back to the center, the things that you see in the mind and the things that you feel in the mind will become gradually clearer. Almost like a person who holds a camera with a still hand will get much clearer pictures than a person who holds a camera with a shaking hand. In the same way, as our mind becomes more still and more firmly established at the center, then the images and feelings that we receive via the mind will become clearer to us. However, the thing which is rather strange is that the more firmly the mind becomes established at the center, the less will become the number of thoughts in the mind. The number of thoughts in the mind will become less and less, until eventually there are no remaining thoughts in the mind anymore, and the mind can come to a standstill at the center. A standstill means that the mind rests inside the body without any thinking anymore. Some people think that the mind is nothing without thinking. But if you reach this point in your meditation, you'll find out that in fact the mind without thought is much more powerful than the mind caught up in concepts. The mind that is free of all thoughts can start to draw upon consciousness at a deeper level. Consciousness which we call the gut feeling of the mind, consciousness which we call the inner wisdom of the mind. Once we switch on to these things, then it will be like a light within ourselves, which will start to unravel the mysteries of our life and the world around us. Because wherever there is light, then there is knowledge. Wherever there is knowledge, then no ignorance can creep in. All the other things, whether it's fear, greed, hatred, delusion, no longer have a place to hide themselves anymore. Because once we have understood the reality of the world through inner experience, then no one can persuade us to understand the world differently anymore, because we have seen the nature of the world for ourselves. So now for a few more moments in silence, each their own meditation, cultivating the mind at the center with your bright object and the sound of the mantra, for a few more moments in silence until we come to the appropriate time. Always keep your mind at a standstill at the center of the body, as continuously as you can, for as long as you can, without letting your mind wander anywhere else. If you find your mind is attracted away by the sounds around you, sensations in your body, or thoughts in your head, as soon as you realize, always bring your mind back again to the center and continue as before. Cultivate your mind in this way as continuously as you can for as long as you can, with or without the mantra, depending on your own style. Buddha nupavena, Sabba Dhamma nupavena, Sabba Sangha nupavena, Sattha Sodhi Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position and gently finish your practice. So, to return to the subject of defilements or rust in the mind, we now continue by taking a look at some of the difficulties in dealing with defilements. In medical science, they use all sorts of technologies to study the infections in the body. For example, microscopes would be used to identify the infection, study the properties of infection, and put a name to it. For the mind, it is the same process. Meditators have to identify a defilement they wish to remove from their own minds, catch the defilement, and then remove it. Unfortunately, this is made more challenging by at least 3 obstacles to removing defilements from the mind. Firstly, the defilements are hard to see. The problem with pinpointing defilements in the mind is that the defilements are even smaller than the mind itself. Most people cannot even see their own mind, let alone the defilements in the mind. Unable to see our own defilements, usually all we can detect about the working of such defilements is the effects they have on our behavior. Therefore, dealing with the defilements directly is a delicate task. Secondly, we take our defilements for granted. Our mind is so used to being steeped in defilements that it's hard even to notice the effect they are having on us. We feel that they are like a legitimate part of our personality. It's like a person with athlete's foot who enjoys having an itch to scratch. It's like a disfigured beggar who relies on the disfigurement to procure donations. In the same way, we are used to the defilements in our own minds. If anyone does something to annoy us, we feel justified to express our anger in order to teach them a lesson. We skip the niceties out of fear that next time round they will not think twice before annoying us again. We may even go as far as to be proud of our defilements. If we manage to rip someone off instead of feeling guilty, we plan to take them for even more next time round. We are as used to our defilements as a fish is used to water. If anyone attempts to take a fish out of water, it will struggle with all its might to get back into the water again. In the same way, people are so used to defilements that they will go to great lengths to hang on to them. Try taking the bottle away from an alcoholic. They will tell you, "You can't do that. That bottle is my life." We are all the same to a greater or lesser extent. When the alarm goes off in the morning, how many people hit snooze, turn over, and go back to sleep? How many times have you found yourself turning on the TV even though you know there's nothing on that you want to see? Thirdly, the way to remove defilements is hard to fathom. Some people know that defilements exist in the mind, and they know that the mind takes defilements for granted, but they don't have any idea how to overcome those defilements. They know they are lazy, but they don't have any idea what to do about it. They know they shouldn't hit on their neighbor's wife, but they cannot get over their obsession. They have no idea how to overcome the temptation. All they think is, why does it have to be me? Although defilements may be small, abstract, and hidden away in the deepest recesses of our minds, they cannot fail to have dire effects on our everyday lives. To give a practical example, defilements can show up in the workplace, especially for those who take decisions in an unjust way. Sometimes management lose their employees' trust because they let defilements of bias interfere with their decisions. There are 4 reasons why decisions can be biased as a result of defilements: because of favoritism, because of hatred, because of ignorance, and because of fear. We often find the first 2 in the workplace. Bosses tend to treat employees who are diligent and capable better than those who are lazy or incompetent. A boss may be prejudiced by fear when objecting to bad behavior by someone who might affect their career, letting them off lightly, for fear that their own prospects of promotion will be damaged. Prejudice under the influence of ignorance comes when a boss acts upon hearsay instead of hearing both sides of a story. To overcome such prejudice, as a better boss, they would have to become more conscious of the way in which their feelings and emotions affect the way they decide things. It is difficult enough to make a success out of the tasks we do alone when under the influence of defilements in our mind. But when we come to work with others, because of the defilements of no two people being the same, there will be many more potential conflicts of interest to contend with as a result. Thus, although the possibilities of achievement are less when working alone, it often seems easier than working as part of a team. We definitely need more patience to work as a team because we have to train ourselves to see a situation from many points of view instead of simply reacting to it selfishly. A good example of aggravation in the workplace caused by defilements comes when a boss has the delicate task of giving feedback when employees are learning a new task. If the boss is not aware of the way in which their own defilements interact with the point of view of the trainee, they might appear excessively fussy or patronizing. In the same way, when we first start a new job, our boss or trainer needs to take good care of us, gradually teaching us more about our work until we can rely on our own experience. However, as time goes on, what do we feel like if we are already competent and our boss is continually micromanaging our work, like they were on the first day? Usually we would feel irritated. At first we might feel respect for the boss, but after a while, if they are still patronizing, our respect for them would deteriorate. There's a good parable for this in the staking out of sapling trees. A sapling is weak and easily blown down by the first gust of wind. Thus, when it's young, it must be secured to a stake until it takes firm root for itself. At this stage, the stake is a necessity. When the tree is more fully grown, being fixed to a stake may no longer be as necessary because, probably, the tree can support itself in the face of strong winds. When the tree is fully grown, the stake would definitely be redundant. If we are the boss, before offering advice, we should first consider whether it's going to be necessary or redundant in the light of the employee's level of knowledge and capability. In the case of a sapling or a full-grown tree, it's not so hard to tell. But what about a tree which is halfway grown to maturity? It is in this area that the employees and the boss will see things differently. Employees think the advice is redundant, but the boss thinks it's necessary. In such a case, the boss should tell the employee what they want achieved, but not how to achieve it, and leave the employees to make their own mistakes. This is what is called a learning culture in the workplace. Two conditions for this to work are that the boss will need to stay on the sidelines in case something goes wrong, and the task allocated should not be the sort of work which will have catastrophic consequences if it fails, because in the end it is the boss who will have to take the blame. Employees who see advice as redundant are usually overconfident. However, when the wind blows and the branches are bent, leaves are torn away and branches break, in the end they will start to see the obstacles for themselves and will start to feel ill at ease. They will begin to realize that the boss's advice is not redundant but necessary to the success of the task. At this point, the boss should come back and help. The boss shouldn't kick them when they're down, but use this opportunity to show their compassion by treating the problem as nothing special. In the end, the gap between the original difference in view between the employees and the boss will diminish. Thus, any boss who wants to command respect must avoid unnecessary interference. As we've already mentioned, defilements are basically the residue of bad habits. As shown in the diagram, defilements originate from unskillful life choices, which worsen the quality of our mind, leaving a residue of defilements in the mind. Having more defilements in our mind will feed back into worse life choices in the future. By the opposite token, skillful life choices will lead to better quality of mind. leading to a reduction of defilements in the mind and eventually feeding back into even better life choices. Even speaking statistically, the more we have done something in the past, the more likely we will be to repeat it in the future. If all our actions in the past are good and virtuous things, then that would be our good luck. However, for most of us, there are bad habits too. The more we give in to bad habits, the greater the chance that we will relapse further. If we try to resist bad habits, we may feel it takes a lot of effort. Although we may not see the source of such resistance at its root, we can know what we are up against are the defilements. To give a superficial example, if we punch someone on the nose, then it increases the chance that they will punch us back at some time in the future. But it also increases the likelihood that we will punch other people too in the future. We are that much less in control of ourselves. The defilements are the little voice which persuaded us to punch them in the first place, even though it may be contrary to our better judgment. Defilements encourage negative intentions to arise in our minds. They block positive intentions from arising. If we are off our guard, they will turn the negative intentions into negative comments that escape from our mouths as words. The retribution becomes that much worse because our speech is then open to public scrutiny. If we are still off our guard, negative words might go further to become negative actions such as hitting other people. The methods for overcoming defilements at various levels will be part of the subject matter for future sessions. However, for today, we simply need to remind ourselves that as meditators, we have two important duties concerning the defilements in the mind. Firstly, to protect ourselves from collecting additional defilements, and secondly, to find ways to remove the defilements that already exist in the mind. If, however, we resist the action of defilements by resisting their persuasion, or by filling our mind only with positive thoughts, or by stopping the proliferation of negative intentions before they get as far as negative words or actions, it will serve to burn up those defilements, and the next time round it will loosen the hold those defilements have over us. In conclusion, before we might have thought of emotions as being just a part of our personality, laughing or crying a lot. But from a meditator's perspective, emotions are a much broader spectrum than that, not just happy, sad, but lots of shades of emotion in between and even different dimensions entirely that can be traced back to rust in the mind of various categories. As meditators, we need to be able to classify them and deal with them at their roots, so that we can examine ourselves for the presence of these forms of rust in our own minds and know where to draw the line, while knowing about the ways in which meditation can help us overcome these. So now we come to the part of our live stream when we try to answer some of the questions sent in by viewers. My question today is another one from Kathleen of Glendora. Here comes the question. How can we prepare our minds to be mindful in our sleep? More specifically, how can we prepare our minds to create good merit in our dreams? Hi Kathleen, thank you for your question. Last time, just before the meditation session, I did mention that illness, dying, dreams and meditating are times when the mind truly comes into its own. But generally, mindfulness is something that you need to train yourself in during your waking hours, because this is the time when you are fully in control of your mind and when your intentionality can interact directly with the law of karma to create karmic outcomes that are positive for our future. The time when we are asleep is not a time of high priority for our spiritual training. Nevertheless, seeing as you ask, there is some advice which you can apply to your sleeping hours. The advice for a better night's sleep is spreading loving kindness for a few minutes, sitting up before lying down to go to sleep, and putting your mind at the center of your body before you go to sleep. Also, there are some resources for how to upgrade the quality of normal dreams into dreams of a quality known as lucid dreams, where you are aware you are dreaming while you are actually having the dream. Apparently, you can upgrade the quality of your dreams to lucid dreams by the practice of dream-induced lucid dreams, DILD for short. You can Google that, where you develop the ability to do cool things to take back control of your dreams, such as forcing yourselves in your dream to look away from something and then look back again. Similarly, you might consider keeping a dream diary. Anyway, the main point from me is, instead of worrying about your dreams, you are always better to focus your efforts on developing mindfulness while you are awake. And what comes through in your dreams, or by extension when you are sick or dying, should just be regarded as a bonus. So let me finish up with a couple of news updates, one about the upcoming Katina ceremony at the temple, and the other my usual PSA about the availability of meditation teaching in English. This year, the abbot at DIMC has set the price of Katina funds at the especially low amount of $100 to make it accessible to all, irrespective of their income or lack of it in these unpredictable times. Of course, if $100 is not enough for you, you can donate several funds at once, or maybe dedicate donations in the name of friends or relatives. The Katina funds this year will be put towards the building of the 72nd anniversary meditation building, which I understand is close to obtaining planning permission even as we speak. The leader of this year's Katina at DIMC Azusa is Kun Amara Banjong Siri, and she has recently recorded a video where she encouraged all our viewers to share with her in offering the Katina merits, in order to set an example to Buddhists and philanthropists the world over in these times of COVID pandemic, because as a community we have never let obstacles get in the way of our cultivation of good deeds and perfections. It is said that any good deeds we manage to cultivate in the face of great adversity are always going to make a stronger karmic impression on our mind than good deeds cultivated under normal circumstances. The COVID pandemic hopefully doesn't come around too often, so if you can see this crisis as an opportunity to add special meaning to the good deeds we normally do, the Katina ceremony coming up on Azusa on October 18th is a very special opportunity that will magnify and multiply our merits, and it is a proving ground to see how resolute we are in our practice of generosity. So try to have a part in the upcoming Katina ceremony, even if it's just to donate a single $100 Katina fund, and help to make a wish on the basis of the merit that the pandemic will be overcome soon. I should warn everyone in advance, since the 100-person public gathering rule for the state of California will probably still be in place on October the 18th, it will probably only be selected participants who can attend the ceremony in person on the day, so don't get your hopes up for the usual mass gathering. Apart from Katina, the temple continues to be reliant on its weekly COVID Silver Lining Fund for food, medicine, and utilities to keep the temple community going. Convenient ways to make a donation, whether it is Katina or the COVID Silver Lining Fund donation, are by mailing checks to the temple address or by making a bank transfer. Online transfers can be made by Venmo or Zelle. The special merits arising from those practicing generosity in these times of adversity are that you will have a life free of obstacles and danger, you will gain mastery of all forms of knowledge, prosper in your duties, have special insight into Dharma teachings, attain purity with ease, breaking free of the defilements in the mind. You will gain wealth on worldly, spiritual, and transcendental levels, allowing you to pursue perfections with ease, all the way to the attainment of the utmost Dharma. The whole temple would like to rejoice in your merits on this occasion. Meditation is particularly valuable in this COVID era to help us cope with the dysphoria of the new normal. In this respect, here at the temple, although there's still no face-to-face teaching sessions for the interim, you can access Dhamma teachings in English at the YouTube channel called Peace Point Meditation, or the Facebook page of Peace Point Meditation, either live on Thursday evenings, on Sunday mornings, or on demand after the event. Peace breaks are broadcast every evening between 7 and 8 p.m. from Friday to Wednesday. For the benefit of families listening in, there's also a special show for children in English known as Shining Stars, that goes out between 7:30 and 8 p.m. every Monday evening, with bedtime stories and a meditation short enough to keep the attention of young listeners. Outside of the live streams and on-demand programming, there's also the MindGem app, which you can download for free, allowing you to listen to meditation and Dhamma talks in English on your cell phone, even when you are offline. And also, I should add that in Azusa, because the level of airborne particulate matter remains high due to the smoky fallout of the Bobcat fire, the receiving of offerings in the temple front garden each day between 9:30 to 11 a.m. has, for everyone's health, been downsized to a monk coming down to the temple gate by request to receive offerings until the air quality gets back to healthy levels. So if you'd like to brave the smoke to make an offering, it is probably best to phone in advance to either the number of Jenny or Crystal that you saw on the Katina slide earlier. So this session we have looked at the topic of rust in the mind. For my next session online with you, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning and a week on Thursday evening, we'll be back moving on to look at the subject of the defilements of greed and contentment as its antidote. For good measure, I would like to remind viewers, even better than posting thank you or great talk or a sadhu in the broadcast comments, you can email your questions about meditation or what you have heard in the lecture to the address peacepoint.questions@gmail.com, as you can see spelled out on the slide, and I will do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to stay healthy, avoid recklessness in the face of the virus, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Try to keep up with the working of defilements in your mind and develop the ways I've suggested to overcome these. So today, this is me, Prior Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for this session. So long, folks, and stay safe.